He wasn't supposed to survive. A Marine, betrayed by his team, left to die, but his K9 was the only one who never gave up. The desert storm raged around them, sand whipping through the air, turning the world into a blur. The Marine, barely conscious, felt his body go numb. Every breath came harder, every heartbeat slower. But his K9, a German shepherd with a coat the color of midnight, was still alert, still strong, standing guard against the chaos. The dog's amber eyes never left him, watching with a quiet intensity. He had been through it all before. With every step the Marine took, the K9 matched him, his paws silent on the ground, ready to protect, ready to fight. They had been through battles together, side by side, and now they would face this one alone. The Marine tried to move, but his legs refused to respond. His strength was fading, and he felt the weight of the world press against him. The K9 circled around him, never straying too far, always staying close. It was a bond forged in the heat of combat, a bond stronger than the pain they both felt. The enemy had left him for dead, but the K9 had not. It understood the mission. It understood the importance of keeping him alive. As the hours dragged on, the storm showed no signs of letting up. The wind howled, and the temperature dropped. The Marine's body was shaking uncontrollably, but still, the K9 did not leave. It stayed by his side, guarding him, protecting him. The Marine's eyes closed for what felt like the final time, but just as the darkness started to take him, the K9's growl broke through the silence. The dog's voice was a warning, a signal. It wasn't done yet. The Marine's hand twitched, a small movement, but enough to send a spark of life back into him. He opened his eyes, his vision blurry, but he could see the K9's face, full of determination. "Come on, Marine." It seemed to say, "We're not done yet." The Marine's breath came in shallow gasps, but he forced himself to sit up, using the K9 as his anchor. With the dog's help, he managed to get to his feet, one shaky step at a time. The storm might have been fierce, but it could not defeat them. Together, they would survive this. They had to. The K9 nudged him forward, its movements sure and steady. No hesitation, no fear, just the drive to keep going. The Marine looked down at his loyal companion. "You're not giving up on me," he whispered, the words barely leaving his lips. The K9's tail wagged once, a small gesture, but it meant everything. They weren't alone in this fight. Not anymore. With every step, they grew stronger, united in the bond that had carried them through the darkest of times. The storm may have tested their limits, but it couldn't break them. Not as long as they had each other. The Marine's body was still shaking, the cold gripping him tighter with each passing second. His breath came in ragged gasps, and the storm continued to howl around them. But the K9 was unwavering, guiding him through the blinding sand and harsh wind. With every step, the Marine could feel the strength of his companion at his side. There was no time to rest, no time to waste. They had to keep moving. The Marine looked down at the dog, the German shepherd that had been by his side through countless missions, and he knew that without this loyal companion, he wouldn't have made it this far. The dog had sensed danger before he even realized it, had saved him when he had no strength left to fight. The Marine reached down, running his hand through the dog's thick fur, the only source of warmth in the relentless cold. He had always trusted his K9 partner, but now, more than ever, he knew he owed his life to this silent protector. Through the storm, they continued forward, the K9 leading the way with its sharp instincts. The Marine struggled to keep up, his body barely responding, but the dog never faltered. It was as if the K9 understood the mission, as if it knew that they had to survive. The hours stretched on, and the landscape began to change. The sand and dust slowly gave way to rocky terrain, the jagged edges of rocks cutting into their path. But the K9 didn't hesitate. It moved with purpose, its eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The Marine followed, his steps growing heavier with each movement, but the dog was always there, by his side, urging him forward. It wasn't long before the Marine began to feel the weight of his injuries. His leg was giving out, and his head was spinning. He stumbled, nearly falling to the ground, but the K9 was there, its nose gently nudging him back onto his feet. The Marine let out a breath, pushing through the pain, refusing to let the storm win. The K9 was his lifeline, and he couldn't let it down. The storm was relentless, But so was the bond between the Marine and his dog. They had faced battles together, seen the worst of humanity, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about loyalty, about the unspoken bond between a Marine and his canine, a bond that couldn't be broken. With each step, the Marine felt the weight of that bond, the promise they had made to each other. They were a team, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. As the storm began to ease, the Marine felt a flicker of hope. The clouds parted just enough to let a sliver of sunlight break through, casting a soft glow over the rocky landscape. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They had made it through the worst of it. The Marine knew they couldn't stop yet. They had to keep moving, but for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to believe that they might just make it out of this alive. The K9 looked up at him, its eyes filled with the same quiet determination. Together, they would survive. The hours stretched on, and the Marine's strength was fading. The storm had passed, but the remnants of the freezing wind still cut through his clothes, biting into his skin. The K9 continued to lead him, its steady pace never faltering, as if the dog knew the way even when the Marine could no longer trust his own instincts. The Marine stumbled again, his legs giving out beneath him, but the K9 was there, steadying him with a nudge. He could feel the dog's breath on his face, warm against the cold, and for a brief moment, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were not alone. The world around them was desolate, the landscape nothing but rocks and barren ground, but there was still life between them, a bond that couldn't be broken. The Marine could feel his body growing weaker, but his mind was still sharp. He needed to get to safety, to find help. The K9 seemed to sense his thoughts, its eyes constantly scanning the terrain, watching for any signs of danger or refuge. They kept moving, step by step, until the Marine's vision blurred. He collapsed, his body finally giving way to the exhaustion, and for a moment, he feared it was the end. But then he felt the K9's nose nudge him once more, the dog's low whine filling the air, a sound full of urgency and determination. The Marine opened his eyes, struggling to stay conscious. He could see the dog's face, its eyes locked on him, willing him to stay awake. "Come on, Marine," the K9 seemed to say. "We're almost there." With every ounce of strength left, the Marine pushed himself up, leaning on the dog for support. They weren't far now. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the landscape, and in that moment, the Marine knew they had to keep going. He couldn't give up. Not now. The K9 continued to lead the way, never looking back, never slowing down. They were in this together, and as long as the dog was by his side, the Marine knew there was still a chance. The darkness crept in as the night took hold, but the K9 was a beacon of light, guiding them forward. The Marine could feel the warmth of the dog's body against his side, and it gave him the strength to take another step. Then, in the distance, he saw a faint light, a sign of civilization. They had made it. They had survived. The K9, still by his side, let out a soft bark, as if to say, "We did it." The Marine smiled weakly, the first real smile he had felt in days. Together, they had fought the storm, the elements, and their own doubts. And together, they had found their way home. The Marine's vision remained blurry, but the light ahead grew clearer with each step. The K9 was still by his side, never wavering, its tail slightly wagging as if it knew they were close. The warmth of the dog against him was the only thing keeping him grounded. His body felt heavy, like it belonged to someone else, but the dog kept pushing forward, leading him with silent persistence. With the last of his strength, the Marine managed to take another step, then another. Each step felt like an eternity, but the K9's presence was unwavering, urging him on. The light in the distance grew brighter, and the Marine's hope flickered with it. He could see the outline of a building, just ahead, standing tall against the darkened sky. It was a small structure, perhaps a shelter, but it was enough. The Marine's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse a rhythmic reminder of how far they had come. He reached out, his fingers trembling as he gripped the dog's collar, pulling himself closer to the building. The K9 stopped for a moment, looking back at him, its amber eyes filled with what seemed like understanding. It was more than a dog, more than just a partner. It was a lifeline. The Marine's legs were shaking, and his breath was shallow, but he managed to make it to the door. The K9 stood by him, its gaze never leaving him, as if it was watching over him even now. As the Marine knocked on the door, the sound seemed distant, almost muffled by the storm that still raged inside him. But the door opened, revealing a figure in the doorway, a silhouette bathed in light. It was a man, a fellow Marine, who had been out searching for him. His face was tired, but when he saw the Marine and his K9, a look of relief washed over him. "We thought we'd lost you," the man said, his voice filled with disbelief. The Marine couldn't speak at first, his throat too dry, but he managed to whisper, "We made it." The K9, still standing strong, let out a low bark, as if to say, "We're not done yet." The man stepped aside, motioning for the Marine to enter. The warmth inside the building felt like heaven. The Marine collapsed into a chair, the weight of everything finally hitting him. The K9, ever faithful, sat beside him, its head resting on the Marine's knee. The storm outside had passed, but the bond between them was unbreakable. They had survived together, and now they would heal together. The Marine reached down, rubbing the dog's ears gently, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He had made it, and it was because of the K9, the one who had never given up on him. And as the man looked at them, a new sense of gratitude filled the air. The Marine and his K9, they had found their way home, together. The days that followed were a blur. The warmth of the shelter felt almost like a distant memory as the Marine slowly recovered from the physical and emotional toll of his ordeal. The K9 stayed by his side, never leaving, always alert. It was as though the dog understood that the battle wasn't over, that the healing process was just beginning. The Marine sat by the window one morning, staring out at the landscape. The storm had passed, the sky was clear, and the sun was rising, casting golden light over the earth. It felt like a new beginning. The K9, now lying beside him, let out a soft sigh, its head resting on the Marine's foot. The bond between them had deepened in those days in the wilderness. The Marine had seen the worst of things, had felt the weight of loneliness and despair, but he had also experienced the purest form of loyalty, a loyalty that didn't ask for anything in return, a loyalty that never wavered, even when hope seemed lost. The Marine's thoughts drifted to the day they had found shelter. The man who had opened the door, the fellow Marine, had been the first face he had seen in days. The look of relief on his face had been a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. But even in that moment, the Marine knew that the K9 had been the one who had led him to safety. The dog had been his compass, his guide through the darkest hours. Without the K9, he would have been lost. And yet, the K9 had never shown any sign of doubt, never hesitated, always moving forward with purpose. As the Marine continued to recover, he found himself reflecting on that bond. He had always known the loyalty of a good dog, but what he had experienced with this K9 was something different, something deeper. It wasn't just about the training or the missions they had been on together. It was about survival. It was about trust. It was about a partnership that went beyond words, beyond actions. It was a silent understanding that needed no explanation. The Marine reached down, scratching the dog's ears, and for the first time in days, he smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. The K9 lifted its head and looked at him, those amber eyes filled with quiet understanding. The bond they shared was unspoken but undeniable. And in that moment, the Marine knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. He wasn't alone anymore. Not with the K9 by his side. The days ahead would be filled with challenges, but as long as the Marine had the K9, he knew he could face anything. Together, they had survived the storm. Together, they would heal. And together, they would move forward, one step at a time. The days began to feel more like a routine, but each one carried with it a small victory. The Marine spent his time recovering, his muscles slowly rebuilding strength, but it was the quiet moments that marked the true progress. He would sit in the small shelter, watching the K9 as it lay next to him, its eyes never straying far from him. There was something comforting about that presence, something that brought peace to his restless mind. The Marine found himself thinking more and more about the journey they had been through. The storm had seemed endless, a trial that tested not only his physical limits, but his very spirit. Yet, in the midst of it all, the K9 had never faltered. The dog had been the one constant, the one thing that had never given up. It had stayed by his side through the darkest hours, never asking for anything in return but his trust. And in return, the Marine had given it everything he had. The bond between them had grown stronger with every step they had taken together. There were still moments when the Marine would wake in the middle of the night, the darkness pressing in on him, and he would find the K9 right there beside him, offering a sense of calm. It was as if the dog knew when he needed reassurance, knew when the weight of the world was too much to bear. The K9 would simply nudge him with its nose, a silent reminder that they were in this together. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. The Marine had never realized how much he had relied on that loyalty, that quiet strength. He had been a soldier, trained to fight, to survive, but it was the K9 that had shown him the true meaning of resilience. As the weeks passed, the Marine grew stronger, his body healing, his spirit lifting. He spent more time outside, walking with the K9 by his side, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs. The landscape around them was rugged, but there was beauty in it, a raw beauty that the Marine hadn't noticed before. He could feel the bond between him and the K9 growing deeper with every step, and it was in these moments, as the dog trotted along beside him, that he truly understood what it meant to be alive. He had survived, not because of the strength in his own body, but because of the strength of his bond with the K9. Together, they had fought the storm, and together, they would face whatever came next. The Marine reached down and scratched the dog's ears, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They had made it through the hardest part, but they both knew that the journey wasn't over. There were still battles to fight, still challenges to overcome, but as long as the K9 was with him, he knew he would be ready. They were a team, and nothing could break that bond. Not the storm, not the world, not even time itself. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow across the landscape as the Marine sat on the small porch of the shelter. The K9 was lying next to him, its head resting on its paws, its eyes watching the horizon. The air was cool, and the evening breeze carried the faint scent of pine and earth. The days had grown quieter, and as the Marine looked out at the vast, open space before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. It was a peace that came from knowing that he had made it through the worst, that he had survived, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The K9 had been his constant companion, a silent source of strength and reassurance. The dog had been by his side through every moment of uncertainty, and now, as the Marine sat in the quiet of the evening, he realized just how much that companionship had meant to him. He had never expected to find such a bond, such loyalty, in a dog. But the K9 had shown him something he hadn't understood before. It wasn't just about survival. It was about the quiet moments, the ones that mattered most. The ones where no words were needed, where the presence of another being was enough to make everything feel right. The Marine reached down, gently stroking the dog's head, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers. The K9 looked up at him, its amber eyes filled with the same quiet understanding. The bond they shared wasn't just built on the hardships they had faced together. It was built on trust, on the silent promises they had made to each other. The Marine smiled softly, a sense of gratitude swelling in his chest. They had both come so far. They had both endured so much, but they had made it. The K9 had shown him the true meaning of loyalty, and in return, the Marine had given the dog everything he had. They were no longer just a Marine and a K9. They were a team, a partnership that could not be broken. The Marine stood up, his legs still a little unsteady, but stronger than they had been in days. The K9 stood with him, its posture alert, ready for whatever came next. Together, they walked into the fading light, side by side, knowing that they were never alone, that they had each other. The road ahead was still uncertain, but as long as they had each other, they knew they could face anything. The world around them had been harsh, but in this moment, they were at peace. Together, they would continue, one step at a time, through whatever came their way. The Marine and the K9 had settled into a rhythm. The days were still quiet, but there was a new sense of purpose between them. The shelter was small, but it felt like home now. The Marine had learned to embrace the peace that had once felt so foreign to him. He spent his mornings with the K9, walking through the surrounding woods, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, and letting the dog lead the way. The K9 was always alert, its eyes scanning the surroundings, its nose twitching as it detected every new scent. It was a constant reminder of how far they had come, how much they had been through. The bond they shared had only grown stronger with time. The Marine couldn't help but think back to the storm, to the days they had spent fighting their way through the wilderness. He had been so focused on survival then, so consumed by the need to stay alive, that he hadn't realized just how much the K9 had given him. It wasn't just about the dog's loyalty or its strength. It was the way the K9 had been there for him when he needed it most. The way it had stayed by his side without question, guiding him when he was too weak to make his own way. The Marine had always thought he was strong, that he could face anything on his own. But the K9 had shown him a different kind of strength. A strength that came from partnership, from mutual trust. As the Marine sat on a weathered log one afternoon, watching the K9 play in the clearing, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at a bond that would last forever. The K9 had given him something he hadn't known he needed, a reminder that no one truly survives alone. The dog was more than a companion. It was a friend, a guardian, a lifeline. And as the Marine looked at the dog, running through the grass with boundless energy, he realized that he had found a kind of peace he hadn't thought possible. They had made it through the hardest of times, and now, they were together in a place that felt safe, a place where healing could truly begin. The Marine knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready. Ready because he knew that as long as he had the K9 by his side, they could face anything. The K9 stopped and looked back at him, as if to say, "We're in this together." And in that moment, the Marine knew without a doubt that they would always have each other, no matter what the future held. The days continued to pass slowly, and the Marine found himself growing stronger, more in tune with the quiet rhythms of life in the shelter. The K9 was always by his side, its presence as steady and comforting as the sunrise each morning. The bond between them had become something unspoken, a silent understanding that needed no words. Every step they took together was a testament to the strength they had found in each other. The Marine had learned to appreciate the simplicity of the moments they shared. The world outside had been a place of chaos and uncertainty, but here, in the calm of the shelter, he could finally breathe. There was no more rushing, no more fighting to survive, just peace. He would wake up early in the morning, watching as the first light of day broke through the trees, and the K9 would always be there, sitting beside him, its amber eyes filled with quiet loyalty. It had been through so much with him, and in those moments, the Marine could sense how much it had given. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about healing, about moving forward. The Marine felt a deep sense of gratitude as he looked at the K9. He had been through the worst, but the dog had been with him every step of the way. It had never once hesitated, never once doubted. It had been his companion, his protector, his friend. And now, as the Marine felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders, he knew that the K9 had given him a gift, something he hadn't realized he needed. It had shown him that true strength wasn't about fighting alone. It was about having someone by your side, someone who would stay with you, no matter the cost. The Marine stood up and stretched, feeling the muscles in his legs respond, stronger than they had been in weeks. The K9 followed his every movement, its tail wagging as it stood to join him. They walked together through the woods, the dog leading the way, its instincts sharp as ever. The Marine smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. They had made it through the darkest of days, and now, they had each other. As they reached the edge of the woods, the Marine paused for a moment to look out at the vast landscape before him. The world had once felt so uncertain, so unforgiving. But now, with the K9 at his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He wasn't alone anymore. They were a team, and together, they would move forward, one step at a time, with the quiet strength that only true companionship could bring. The Marine and his K9 continued their routine, each day blending into the next, but with a steady sense of growth. There was still much to be done, healing, physically and mentally, but the Marine felt a renewed sense of purpose. The peaceful days had helped, but it was the quiet companionship of the K9 that had made the most difference. It was in the small moments, the moments where words were not needed, where the simple presence of the dog brought calm to his restless mind. They spent time together in the woods, walking the familiar paths as the Marine's legs grew stronger. Each step felt like a victory, a reminder of how far he had come. The canine was always a few paces ahead, its movements confident and sure. The Marine smiled as he watched the dog's tail sway with each step, its alert eyes scanning the surroundings. It was the perfect partner, always looking out for him, always guiding him forward. As the days turned into weeks, the Marine noticed how the world around him had shifted. The air felt lighter, the sky seemed clearer, and there was a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. He had once feared that the weight of the past would consume him, but now, with the K9 by his side, he knew he could face whatever came next. The Marine paused one morning, looking out over the landscape as the sun began to rise. The light from the rising sun bathed the world in soft hues of gold and pink. The K9, standing beside him, let out a soft bark, as if in greeting to the new day. The Marine felt a sense of gratitude fill him, a deep, overwhelming thankfulness for the journey they had taken together. They had survived the storm, the darkest days, and now, they were here, in this quiet moment of peace. It was more than he could have hoped for. He reached down and scratched the dog behind the ears, feeling the soft fur beneath his fingers. The K9 looked up at him, its amber eyes filled with that familiar trust, and the Marine knew, in that moment, that he was never truly alone. They had been through so much together, and yet, they had found each other again, in a place where healing could truly begin. Together, they were stronger, not just because of their shared experiences, but because of the bond they had forged. The Marine smiled as he continued to walk with the K9, the sun rising higher, the day unfolding before them. They were a team, and nothing could break that bond. No storm, no trial, no challenge. They had made it through the hardest times, and now, with every step, they knew they were ready for whatever came next. The Marine had settled into his new routine. Each morning, he woke with the sun, the light creeping through the trees and filling the small shelter with warmth. The K9 was always there, beside him, its watchful eyes the first thing he saw every day. It had become more than just a companion. It had become a part of him, a reminder of how far they had come. The Marine's muscles had continued to strengthen, his body recovering from the exhaustion of the storm, the hardships they had faced together. But it wasn't just the physical healing that was taking place. The quiet moments, the walks through the woods, the days spent in the shelter, were all part of a larger recovery. He had been broken once, but now, there was a sense of peace that he had never known before. He spent time reflecting, remembering the darkest moments, the times he had doubted himself. But now, with the K9 by his side, everything seemed different. The dog never faltered, never showed a hint of doubt, and that unshakable loyalty was exactly what the Marine had needed. It wasn't about the battles they had fought, it was about what they had found in each other during those trials. Trust, strength, a shared purpose. The Marine smiled softly to himself as he watched the K9 run ahead, its tail wagging, its energy boundless. It had been through so much, but it never stopped. It never slowed down. The bond they shared wasn't just based on the physical struggles they had survived. It was built on something deeper, something unspoken. They had both faced uncertainty, but together, they had overcome it. As the Marine watched the dog, a thought lingered in his mind. They had come to this place together, and now, it felt like they were both ready to move forward. There were still challenges ahead. The world beyond the shelter remained unknown, but he was no longer afraid. The Marine stood up, his body still strong from the days of healing. The K9 turned to face him, as if it knew what was coming next. They were ready for whatever lay ahead. Together, side by side, the Marine took a deep breath, and with the K9 by his side, they walked out into the new day, ready to face whatever came their way. The days continued to pass, and with each one, the Marine felt a stronger connection to the life he was rebuilding. The K9, as always, was by his side, its steady presence the anchor that kept him grounded. There was a sense of calm that had settled over them both, a quiet understanding that had been forged in the trials they had faced together. The Marine had learned to trust not only the K9's instincts but his own, as well. They had become more than just a soldier and a dog. They had become two halves of a whole. Every morning, they would set out together, walking through the familiar paths, the landscape now feeling less like a challenge and more like a home. The air was fresh, crisp with the promise of change, and as they walked, the Marine allowed himself to enjoy the simplicity of it. The past had left scars, but it had also given him a new perspective. With the K9 beside him, he had discovered a strength he hadn't known he possessed. It wasn't just the strength of survival, but the strength to move forward, to embrace the future, and to let go of the fear that had once held him back. He had found a peace he never expected, and in the process, he had learned that peace wasn't the absence of struggle, but the ability to face it with someone by your side. The K9 was always there, leading the way with its sharp instincts and unwavering loyalty. It was a reminder of everything they had been through together and everything they still had to face. The Marine felt a deep gratitude in his chest as he watched the dog trot ahead, its tail wagging with that familiar joy. They had both come so far, and there was no doubt in his mind that they would continue to move forward. Together, the K9 looked back at him, its amber eyes meeting his with a sense of quiet understanding. It had always known what the Marine needed, even when the Marine himself had not. It had never once faltered, never once questioned their path. It was a bond that went beyond words. As they reached the edge of the woods, the Marine paused, taking a deep breath and letting the quiet of the world wash over him. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the landscape, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely at peace. The K9 sat down beside him, its body resting against his leg, as if to say, "We've made it." And in that moment, the Marine knew that no matter where the journey took them next, they would face it together, as they always had. The Marine and the K9 stood side by side, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet landscape. The world felt different now, calmer, and the weight of the past no longer seemed as heavy. It had been a long journey, one filled with moments of doubt, struggle, and uncertainty, but they had made it through. The K9 had been there every step of the way, never wavering, its loyalty unwavering even in the darkest of times. The Marine had learned more from this dog than he ever thought possible. It was more than just a companion. It was a symbol of resilience, of strength, and of the bond that could be formed between two beings who had been through hell and come out the other side together. The Marine ran a hand over the dog's fur, feeling the warmth of its body against his leg. They were quiet now, the kind of silence that spoke volumes, a comfortable silence that only the closest of companions could share. There was no need for words. Everything had been said through the years of walking together, of fighting through the storms, both literal and metaphorical. The Marine had learned to trust, not just in the dog's abilities, but in his own as well. The K9 had been the one constant, the one thing he could count on, and it had shown him that he didn't have to face the world alone. They had survived the impossible, together. The Marine had faced many battles, both on the field and within himself, but through it all, the K9 had been his anchor. It had never asked for anything in return, only for trust, and in return, the Marine had given it his heart. He had learned to open up, to rely on someone else, and in doing so, he had healed. The K9 sat beside him now, its head resting on its paws, its eyes peaceful and content. The Marine could feel the bond between them stronger than ever, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of what came next, of what the future held. He knew they would face it together. And together, they could face anything. As the last rays of the sun disappeared, the Marine stood up, and the K9 followed him, always by his side. They walked forward, their steps steady, their hearts full of quiet determination. Whatever came next, they would be ready, because together, they had already survived the impossible.